Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Makbul with you at PTV World, and we're going to be sharing good news with our viewers. And just now we of course know that the IMF Executive Board has approved a $3 billion standby arrangement for Pakistan for a period of 9 months. And this was an important development of course for the country, and we've been waiting for this for quite some time. Of course, initially the staff level agreement was achieved for the standby arrangement, and now of course the Executive Board approval has also made it clear that this is something that Pakistan is going to go ahead with, and indeed this will also pave the way for an immediate distribution of $1.2 billion as part of the program, and then the rest of the money will be coming in in the period of 9 months after 2 quarterly reviews. This is an important statement coming in at a time where Pakistan was in dire need of the kind of economic support that the IMF and other bilateral engagements have provided to the country, and we're of course very happy and very proud of the finance team to be able to make this a success, something which unfortunately became quite a question mark whether or not we're going to in fact go ahead with it or achieve any sort of positive arrangement with the IMF or not. And just on the last day before the program was about to expire, we got the staff level arrangement, and today the Executive Board has also given approval to $3 billion, which means that an immediate transfer of $1.2 billion will be there in Pakistan. And this development is coming in with previous positive developments in the country as well. With of course our bilateral engagements and promises also coming through from our friendly countries, including Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Saudi Arabia earlier had deposited $2 billion with the state bank, and today the finance minister Saklar also announced that the UAE has also deposited $1 billion in the state bank, which means that this is a huge jump in the foreign exchange reserves of the country, and he is also hopeful about the numbers and in the week ending 14th of July. And then now of course with this Executive Board approval of the IMF, the numbers will increase even more. So again, this is a good development for the country, and the Prime Minister of course has also expressed his appreciation for the friendly countries including Saudi Arabia and UAE, and of course previously China as well, that has helped Pakistan in this very important and troublesome times. But there are many challenges that still remain, especially in terms of this standby arrangement, which of course includes many areas, and 4 basic areas are going to be focused on, which includes the implementation of the next fiscal budget, a return to market-determined exchange rate, and appropriately tight monetary policy, which again is something that Pakistan is already dealing with, and further progress on structural reforms, a much-needed area that Pakistan needs to work on as well. So we're going to be obviously dealing with a lot of these challenges in the next 9 months, and hopefully we'll be setting the right tone for the direction that the country has to undertake. For now, it's time for celebration, but a lot of this is also dependent on what the country will be able to fulfill as we move ahead. So we will be focusing our first segment on this particular development, and then of course the kind of support that has been there by the friendly countries, and what Pakistan needs to do in this regard. Our next segment is going to focus on another front, which is a very important challenge for Pakistan as well, which is of course regarding the security concerns and the spike in terrorist activities within the country. For quite some time we've been seeing, especially after the US troop withdrawal in Afghanistan, that there has been a lot of terrorist attacks in the country, and Pakistan unfortunately has been dealing with this for quite some time now. We also know that today there is another attack that the country witnessed, in which of course a group of terrorists had launched an attack on Zhob garrison in northern Balochistan, and we also know that a number of soldiers have also lost their lives, and the operation is underway as we speak, and the terrorists have been limited to a certain area. But of course the issues with regards to what exactly is the objective, where it currently stands, and how many people are involved is still something that is not known. The Prime Minister and the Interior Minister have all condemned this incident, and have also lauded the efforts of the security personnel in this regard, who have always stood up and have not hesitated in giving their lives for the country. And of course a lot of the security and the defense of the motherland that we enjoy is because of these sacrifices. At the same time, we'll also be taking a look not just at this particular incident, but also what it means in terms of the way that different provinces and different parts of the country have been hit over quite some time with regards to the attack on security personnel and the security issues that have resulted in the loss of lives, with KP and Balochistan being the provinces that have been hardest hit. There is good news on one front, though, that in the development in the second quarter of this year, the fatalities seem to be much less than in the first quarter. But of course, there are still concerns remaining in terms of the targeted attacks on security personnel, especially in Balochistan, where we saw an increase in such fatalities. And then moving forward, what it is that needs to be done, both in terms of our internal security threats, and then the way that the external and foreign forces have also been involved within this dynamic. So we're going to be taking a look at all of that and try and analyze the situation as to where we stand today and what needs to be done in terms of specific action to be taken within the country. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analyst Farrukh Pitafi. We've been joined by security analyst Syed Ali in the studios as well, and we've been joined by Maha Rehman, who's an economist, and she's joined us online. Thank you very much, everyone, for being a part of the discussion. And let me start with you, Maha. The good news has just come in about the IMF Executive Board's approval regarding the standby arrangement, which of course means that there is going to be an immediate disbursement of at least $1.2 billion initially, and then of course the remaining amount over a period of 9 months. This of course is something that the country is currently celebrating. How do you look at this particular development and what it means for the country, not just in terms of the foreign exchange reserves, but also in terms of the challenges that lie ahead?
Thank you so much, Sana. I would like to congratulate you, everyone in the studio and the entire nation, on this approval coming through after the SLA was signed. I think this was inevitable that the approval would come through unless there was some major change, we were all expecting it, but it's good to have the approval finally through. So this is going to be good for the economic fundamentals in the country. The economic indicators have already shown signs of positivity following the staff level agreement. But we all need to remember that while we are celebrating the agreement, this is also a breather space that has kicked the possibility of default down the lane. There is still a possibility of default if we don't manage our fundamentals well. And we all know that there's going to be a transition of government coming in August. So we really need to handle these 9 months carefully. The first task before the government is to build the reserves. And at the same time, the government should also focus on, so now in August 14, there will be a caretaker government, and with the new government coming in, focus on building productivity, increasing exports in a sustainable manner, attracting investment, not through real estate, but into the productive sectors of the economy. And we also need to be focusing on taxation. And if you look at the IMF staff level agreement and the statement that came out when the staff level agreement was signed, IMF wants us to also focus on the energy sector reforms. So we should be expecting a hike in the utility rates. It wants us to improve the business climate in the country and also build climate resilience. Last year, Pakistan saw devastating floods, and there is going to be a possibility of that in the coming years. So building resilience for climate change is also on IMF's agenda. But we need to remember that while we celebrate, this is a breather space. We need to use it responsibly and carefully.
Absolutely, and we'll talk about the issues that you have raised as well. But Farrukh, I'd like to take your input as well, especially in terms of course, what this means for the country and exactly what sort of short-term benefit will then be translated to the public as well, because that's of course what the people would be expecting.
Right, Sana, thank you very much for the opportunity, and let me express my gratitude for Maha Sahiba's actually input, because I think that we are simpatico. There are many moving parts that we still have to actually focus on if we want to ensure that this whole deal actually materializes properly, and then we can have the kind of breathing space that is needed. There are many moving parts, as I pointed out, and not only is there this matter of caretaker government. Usually what happens is that caretaker governments decide not to make policies beyond their immediate purview, right? Because of that, circumstances usually are complicated and economy takes a nosedive. And whenever the new government comes, usually it happens that in this country, the same government is not returned, but there are times then that is also not true, that the same government might come back as well. With that kind of a situation, then investors, then international institutions like IMF, World Bank are also very iffy. They are also very unsure. So even in that condition, we keep on hemorrhaging our forex reserves. So it was very important to have something that ensures that we are going to have stable economic arrangement in the next 9 months when we are going through all those upheavals or all those changes. Having said that, now what exactly is the question right now? This SBA has released the first $1.2 billion, but then there are going to be more reviews in coming days. Remember that the last review that we had to go through for the EFF, that was the 8th review, we could not actually make it through. And on the last day, because of the Prime Minister, because of the Army Chief and the Foreign Minister, Finance Minister also kept on lobbying ambassadors, we finally got some good news. But that was like, saved at the last hour, right, in the nick of time. So what happens if in coming days we cannot fulfill all the demands that are there, all the commitments that we have made? Today we have to be grateful to our friends like Saudi Arabia and UAE and China, as you pointed out, because they came through. And today we have even yesterday and today we saw $3 billion that were added to our foreign currency reserves. I think these are good things. But then what is the agenda? What is the plan in coming days? As Maha Sahiba was pointing out, there's going to be, regarding energy sector, we need reforms. And remember, we are talking about reforms, not merely about price hike or for that matter, a removal of subsidies. What does that mean? On one side, you need to remove those subsidies and keep on hiking the price accordingly. But on the other side, if you can diversify, include other means of electricity production as well. With that kind of a situation, things can look up. And finally, because we have had endured this humongous flood last year, because of that of agricultural produce and this inflation was going out of control. Now it seems that things are actually settling down. Let us hope in coming days we encourage FDI, foreign direct investment, in productive sectors, as was pointed out by Maha Sahiba, because we keep on ending up investing more in property, and that is a dead end. You cannot do much with that.
Right. Ali Saab, the situation, of course, is something that was earlier put into question in terms of the capability or the action undertaken by the ruling elite or the finance ministry as well. And there were a lot of question marks in terms of how this entire period where we went back and forth with the IMF and the negotiations kept on moving forward, was it something that could have been handled better, or were there areas which were to be done differently? But do you think that all of that has now been put to pay because we have this executive board meeting now?
Sana, I think it's a very welcome relief, I would put it, rather than a success. As the Prime Minister also aptly pointed out, that it's not a cause for celebration that we are regularly depending on and expecting relief from international financial institutions. However, as Pitafi Saab rightly pointed out, it is a positive sign for 3 reasons. Number one, in the last 15 or 16 months, the current government has managed to repair the economy after it was badly handled and it was erratically run, which made IMF lose confidence in Pakistan's ability to fulfill the commitments which were negotiated in the last government. Thankfully, due to sort of crisis economics, the government did a good job in trying to repair that badly damaged confidence of the international financial institutions. The second aspect, which is also very good, that it represented a whole of government and whole of state approach. Like Pitafi Saab also pointed out, the foreign ministry played its role, Prime Minister played his role, Army Chief played his role, Foreign Minister played his role, Ministry of Finance played its role. So I think there was a collective ownership an understanding of the criticality of the economic security of Pakistan as one of the fundamental pillars of national security. And that sort of sunk in, and that realization was reflected.
Yeah.
Secondly, and the third aspect is that although this government, as the Prime Minister has said, has probably 4 odd weeks left, but the willingness of the current government to go into elections indicates that it has the confidence that after having secured this IMF deal, and which will hopefully also improve the forex reserves, which will improve the confidence of the foreign investors, and hopefully in the coming weeks we'll see a strengthening of the currency and perhaps a lowering of the dollar exchange rate as well, which will also improve the confidence of the investors, the traders. It will revive the economic activity, and hopefully I think that reflects the confidence of the current government that even if they go into elections, this represents a tangible gain in the economic domain, which they will offer to the public in terms of repaired confidence of the international community, improved trust of the international financial institutions, and some whatever realistic relief could have been offered to the public under very challenging circumstances. And with these three things, I think if we go towards elections, perhaps the government is confident that it is sufficient to go into elections and expect some reciprocal support from the voters.
Right, absolutely. And I want to talk more about that, especially in terms of the 9-month period that we have. But I'll come to that. Ms. Maha, the situation with reference to increasing investment in the country is, of course, something that is important, particularly in this 9-month period. But I want to understand initiatives such as the SIFC have been put forward in order to achieve this particular objective. And especially if we talk about the issue of change of government or elections coming through, and then given the economic situation as well, I understand there is some improvement at the moment. But how exactly do you think the SIFC will be able to get sustained FDI in the country, especially given the kind of political instability that we will be seeing in terms of a change of government? Will it be able to transcend that?
I think that's a great question. And to answer that question, I think we need to look into the financing schemes and the investment that the government attracted during the COVID period. So one program that has really been under the fire in the last couple of days is TURF. And the TURF financing that was given to the industrialists via State Bank, but it was the private banks that approved that funding to various industrial elites in the country. And how has that fared? The objective of that increased fiscal stimulus in the economy was that it would increase exports, it would increase employment, and it would increase the overall productivity of the economy. But that stimulus has failed to translate into any visible gains. And so I think, first of all, the government needs to go back and review its policies and see what are the mistakes that it has made so far. Was the mistake in the design? Was the mistake in the implementation? And given in light of this evaluation, whatever the government concludes, that needs to feed back into the design so that moving forward, whether it is SFIC or any other measures that the State Bank and the government take, we also have corporate farming on the table. Whatever measures we are taking, we are not repeating the same mistakes, because we take one decision, we inject finance into the economy, but it doesn't translate into economic fundamentals. So that means that there are other constraints and other impediments that are holding us back from increasing our exports, that are holding us back from generating more jobs in the economy, that are holding us back from increasing productivity in the economy. So review the mistakes, figure out what the real constraints were, and target those constraints. Don't just target the symptom of the problem. So that's one thing. The second thing, which also became a roadblock in the 9th review, was that the government was attracting increased investment through a tax, through the real estate. And that is something that doesn't go down well with IMF, and is also generally not a wise move, because real estate locks capital in an unproductive way. You want to attract investment in the productive sectors of the economy. And so that is very important, that whatever investment that you attract, it's directed and you incentivize the investors to invest in the more productive sectors. Because the key focus of this outgoing government, the caretaker government, and the government coming in, primarily the government coming in, should be to increase productivity so that we can export more to the world. Because right now, if there's one primary problem that the government is going to be facing, that's that of the trade deficit. And so we need to plan and design smart policies so that moving forward, we are able to tackle the challenges at hand and we don't keep repeating the same mistakes. Since we are talking about the trade deficit and we're talking about financing, I also want to talk a bit about taxation because that's also a key demand that has been put forth by IMF, and that's there on the table, that we need to make the taxation progressive. And the two key elements that so far every government has refrained from doing is it has refrained from taxing real estate and it has refrained from taxing the trader community. With the elections coming in, it was very likely that you would also not see that included in the budget, and so that was not there in the budget. But with the new government coming in and with the fresh mandate, these are the two sectors that it should definitely target, and because those two sectors are key if you want to make the taxation progressive, increase the tax revenues, and at the same time, we should also be focusing on, since I talked about the implementation of the policy, focusing on improving the tax administration in the country. And yeah, so don't repeat the mistakes, correct the fundamentals, target the real underlying constraints. And then whatever form the policy takes, whether it's SFIC, TERF, we will be able to achieve correct the fundamentals going forward with these instruments.
All right. Farrukh, I want to understand though, when we talk about these measures and actions to be taken by the government, and the fact also that if there is going to be a change in government and there's going to be a time period of a caretaker setup, and then of course the new government coming in, this is the same time that is also being counted as part of the standby arrangement with the IMF as well, and we need to be able to deliver within that as well, especially in terms of the first quarterly review and then the second quarterly review. So how exactly do you think that something which unfortunately has not been able to been achieved by sitting governments in place also who have been there for a long time will be done so in a time period where there would be a caretaker setup and elections will be happening?
Right, Sana, I think that from a caretaker government, we usually expect that they are going to do just day-to-day business. They are not going to indulge in reforms. We have seen that there was a time when Moin Qureshi was brought in from abroad as the Prime Minister of Pakistan, and he tried to reform the system, but he could not, right? This bit about traders not being taxed properly and this expansion of documentation in the economy, this actually takes me back to the early days of General Pervez Musharraf. What is this year? This is 2023. At that time, it was 1999, right? At that time also, a journal with all the powers of the state and government and Supreme Court had actually given him power to rewrite the constitution as well. That gentleman could not convince the trader community, and every other day there would be shuttered down, hartal or strike. And that process has continued. They have made themselves very vocal, especially they keep on aligning with various political parties, and because of that their lobbying works, and because of that we don't include in the taxation process. That needs to change, otherwise things are going to be really bad. And similarly, real estate, at this moment the country has gone through a massive massive political crisis, and in that the biggest scandal was essentially about real estate and how the wheelers and dealers of the country actually keep on using that to gain more power or influence or getting their money back. So with that kind of a situation, if we don't want to reform, we can stop pretending and say, okay, we own up and these are people, these are holy cows we cannot touch. But otherwise you will have to start reforming. So regarding caretaker setup, I think I have spoken on record. I think the framers of 18th Amendment, the people who came up with the Charter of Democracy, erred when they actually thought of the idea of a caretaker government. I think that never delivers. That is a bad idea. It only adds to more chaos in the economy and politics. What you need is a lame duck government. Whatever government is there, it should continue till the election day, but then election commission should have all the major powers taken away from it, right? So that would ensure policy continuity. But right now, regarding this investment issue, I understand why we are skeptical or worried that any FDI that comes to the country, especially through SIFC, might actually fall through the cracks, because we recently have one experience, and that is, China-Pakistan economic corridor, right? And at that time, one was convinced that trickle down in this country doesn't work. But remember what was those times. At that time, half the day, 12 hours or 18 hours of the day, the country did not have electricity. So how desperate were you? At that time, you ended up actually negotiating most of the lion's share of the CPEC investment in power generation, and that too at very expensive prices. Because of that, we have actually missed an opportunity where we would have actually first invested in infrastructure, and that would have actually created more economic opportunities. Right now, that is not what is happening. The SIFC, especially with the help of Army also, is actually focusing on the sectors where you can have targeted interventions, especially corporate farming. With the Ukraine war, there is so much inflation and super cycle that what you need to do right now is to create as much products, agricultural products as possible, because then that can feed not only Middle East but Africa as well. If we do that, we are made, and with us, other parts of the world are also stabilized. So with that kind of opportunity, I think all you need is 2020 foresight and a vision which is really focused. And with, as I've pointed out, our Army chief has been, now you have even heard him, speaking in public as well. He's very clear about these things. Similarly, the Prime Minister is, I'm sure whosoever is caretaker government, that is also similarly focused. And then we have to get rid of all the SOEs as quickly as possible. That can be achieved through SIFC also, because then they can invest in these businesses and take them away from the government's control.
Right. So the SIFC and its smooth functioning, and the fact that this is a body that, of course, has been created for a specific purpose, means that there will be no issues with its functionality, and there is no threat to the body itself, irrespective of the government.
Why? Remember one thing. We keep on talking about this hybrid political system in the country. Somebody was saying the hybrid, experiment has failed. I said, hello. We have had the hybrid system since 1947, and that continued, to this day. The biggest problem is that when you talk about political side, it has been very unstable. But in this country, two institutions have been quite stable. One, judiciary, minus the lawyers movement, and the second one is Army. So if Army is part of a body, and then it ensures policy continuity, then I'm sure that will continue, right? The only problem, the missing link that I keep on pointing out, is that our approach still is top to bottom. It has to be bottom to top. You have to have the missing link, that is the local governments, and fully empowered, financially empowered local governments. Without that, nobody will want to work at the grassroots level, because there, all the red tape will make it impossible for the businessmen to do their business.
Right. And Marisa, whether you want to add something to that, and go ahead, but also add to this the issues when we talk about any sort of continuation of policy, or the ability of governments to make fundamental changes and reforms, and then for them to be able to implement something, especially when things have eased up a bit. Do you think that there is a possibility of falling into old habits, and for us to be taking the current situation as something which is good enough at the moment, and sort of not being able to deliver the rest of it? And how do we ensure that that in fact is not something that we revert back to?
Sana, I think reviving or continuing the old habits is perhaps not an option. And in fact, it's a national security compulsion to repair and revive our economy. And Pitafi Sahab has done a very extensive analysis. I'll just say there are 4 things that we need to absolutely focus on, irrespective of whoever is in power. Number 1, we need political stability. That is the ultimate overarching factor, because no investor, no production, no growth, no nothing can happen without political stability. So that is number 1. The second thing, as I earlier pointed out, this whole of government approach is useful. We have tried that in addressing the COVID crisis, in which all institutions were on board. That was useful, and that approach, I think, had similar benefits when we handled the economic crisis management, in which you saw army chief, you saw foreign minister, you saw finance minister, you saw prime minister, all doing whatever they can. Wherever they have some influence, they were doing their bit. So this is a very good collective ownership approach. The third aspect is the most important: meeting the commitments of IMF, so that we not only optimally benefit from whatever relief they have offered, but also improve and regain our trust, so that ideally we do not have to go into their program in future. And if at all, as a last resort, God forbid we have to, at least in any subsequent program, the conditions will be less stringent based on our performance and ability to meet their commitments. That's the third aspect. And the fourth aspect is absolutely not reforming our non-performing, ineffective large public sector organizations is not an option. The country cannot afford 600-700 billion rupees being wasted on those entities which should actually be contributing to the revenue growth and tax revenue of the country. That is absolutely, I think, an imperative.
Absolutely. Ms. Maha, the situation, of course, at the current moment also points towards what you earlier referred to, is the possibility of climate-induced disasters in the country, and that has been part of our conversation and negotiations with not just the IMF, but also, of course, the international community in terms of climate justice. But I want to understand whether or not you think that there is a certain interaction in terms of our plans regarding climate change and climate disasters and the economic policies and direction moving forward, and whether the two are in fact connected, and we have a framework that considers all the possibilities that there are, and that we don't really have to then go to any sort of plan B or C in terms of any unfortunate incident.
And that's a great question, and that definitely has a direct impact, because with the floods last year, that increased our internal financing requirement by a lot. Because of the damages to the food crop, to the houses, especially the damage was especially acute in southern Punjab and in Sindh. And that literally affected all segments of our economy and our country in all sectors. So that definitely has a very pronounced impact on your economic decisions, your economic fundamentals, and your financing needs going forward. But what we should have learned from the floods last year is that we need a system. While you cannot control to an extent what will happen, how will the climate change, and what will the impact be, how much rainfall will we get in any particular year. What you can change is how you respond to these climate disasters. And the flood last year should have prepared NDMA and PDMA to be sufficiently prepared to tackle and to not only have effective measures in place so that the damage is reduced, but if there is in wake of a climate disaster, they're able to respond effectively and quickly. And for that, I think we have a very good precedent in terms of the COVID response. In COVID response, NCOC became a very effective body, and it delivered very effectively. And we need a similar system at the national center and the provincial government level that can respond effectively in wake of a climate disaster and have necessary budget allocated for it. Right now, I'll just give you an example. I asked for the flood susceptibility maps of TP, and they were non-existent. No government body has access to those maps except for 1 or 2 districts. And so that's a very basic requirement, a basic tenet that it requires for you to be prepared to know that what areas are more susceptible to floods than others, so that everyone who's operating in those districts can prepare accordingly. So if when you don't even have such basic measures in place, to talk about an effective response system is a far-fetched possibility. And given that we had a very pronounced impact on our financing and other sectors of the economy last year, the government should have done way much more to be prepared for it and to reduce the damage in case there's a disaster, God forbid, this year or in the coming years. So there's a lot more we need to do in that sphere.
Okay, so I want to understand what you're saying, of course, in terms of the measures that aren't there and should have been there. Does that also mean that data in terms of the estimate cost that might there be in case of any unfortunate incident or a climate-induced disaster such as that of last year, that can then be, of course, linked to possible costs that we would have to bear in the future if that indeed occurs? So does that mean that the government does not have those numbers then in terms of what possibly can be a cost that they'll have to bear?
I mean, it does have the numbers from last year. What was the impact on crops? What was the impact on buildings, on infrastructure? And those numbers can very well be used for predictive analytics for this year and for the current year, because you can predict the weather. And based on the weather analytics and the predictive capacity, you can also predict the estimated loss in case of such an event, if such an event was to occur. So it definitely has the possibility of doing that, but such an analysis, to my knowledge, has not been undertaken. And not only that, but the government also needs to set up very robust data measures, because last year what happened was, when the floods happened, it took us a long time to be able to estimate what was the actual cost of the loss. So we need those data systems in place at the district and the sub-district level, so that we can very quickly estimate what is the impact on livelihoods, what is the impact on infrastructure, what areas need relief when and how quickly. So you don't only need data for predictive analytics this year, you also need data so that you are better prepared in case such a disaster was to occur.
Absolutely. And Farrukh, I want to understand this not just in terms of our response to climate change, but also in terms of the plan that we will have for the next 9 months, and particularly also, of course, the first 3 months now with this standby arrangement, because, of course, in that sort of direction that is going to be set will include numbers such as these and, of course, others as well. Is that something that you think is already in place, or is there a strategy and something that has been devised in terms of what will be followed, and not just in terms of some large, broad spectrum objectives that need to be achieved?
Right, Sana, and this question is broader than IMF's own discussions that we had with IMF, right? Because I'll take you back to Geneva, and where we actually came up with a plan to take care of our climate needs and how to actually adapt to climate change, right? And there were many commitments made according to that plan, because there was a plan and it was kind of sort of approved by the international authorities as well. So all you have to do is keep on implementing that, and that can be done in 9 months, it can be done beyond 9 months. But simultaneously, the point about data being available, we keep on talking about PBS, and we keep on talking about how we have accumulated all the data. But I feel that we have this habit of not doing justice with numbers. We create silos and unfinished silos, and we quietly actually abandon them. Now, right now, we need to have data about everything that is important regarding climate change. You need to have, census is taking place, but you need a number of livestock in the country. You need, talk or data about alluvial plains, the plains that are also, prone to any kind of flooding. With that kind of data together, then we can plan ahead, and we can actually ensure that there is going to be a policy and that actually sticks, that stays there, no matter which government is there. Having said that, macroeconomic stabilization is especially the remit that Pakistan takes from SBA, and we have to actually carry on with that. But then remember that IMF is like a doctor, and what we have been doing is we have been treating it as an authoritarian figure that instructs you and keeps on forcing your hand. When NCOC was in place, when COVID was there was a very different set of international architecture, right? I keep on praising Raghuram Rajan, and if people know what an amazing job he did, I think he will automatically get a Nobel Prize, because he was the one who was designing IMF's response during COVID days. Now he's not there. He's sitting in Chicago teaching his students. Now there's a very different team. So what do? When it comes to our macroeconomic stabilization, then focus on growth as well. They unfortunately have become competing values. Why? IMF keeps on asking us to actually keep on raising our policy rate. Policy rate at 22% can never allow any kind of economic growth, right?
Yeah.
But you need a growth as well, otherwise economy will not move forward. So what you do is you keep on consulting the doctor. The doctor gives you a medicine, it might have reaction. You immediately go back to doctor and say, look, this pill is going to kill me, help me out, and suggest something else. So this is how you will be able to chart the direction forward, and that can be done in 9 months, not like Mullah Jet style that we have been witnessing in past 3-4 years, but a very cooperative, a very submissive kind of attitude where you can actually get the solution.
Right, absolutely. Before we move on, I'd also like to take a look at the Prime Minister's tweet with regards to the IMF's Executive Board approval. And he has, of course, said that this is a major step forward in the government's efforts to stabilize the economy. He's also particularly lauded the efforts of the Finance Minister, Sarkar, and his team, and also thanked the MD of IMF for her support and, of course, for the continuation of this program. Again, a big news for the country. So this is important, especially in terms of what the Prime Minister has also reiterated, the position it puts Pakistan in terms of being able to address its short to medium term challenges and objectives, of course. Adisa, the situation, when we talk about the challenges, of course, is there, and that means tough times are still moving ahead. And this is important, especially when we take a look at the current situation. But I also want to then focus on in terms of its translation to the public, and especially the then aspects of poverty alleviation that the government also simultaneously wants to focus on, while, of course, this is going on in terms of the efforts that Pakistan need to make as per the conditions of the IMF and this standby arrangement. What sort of programs do you think will then be able to at least fulfill that need of the public?
I think Pakistan is right now in a very critical situation, because the nature of challenges that Pakistan is right now facing includes both traditional and non-traditional security. There is a revival of terrorism, as you know. Today there was a major fight between the Pakistani law enforcement agencies, forces, and terrorists in Zhob, Kent, and according to the latest reports, the Kent has been cleared. 5 terrorists have been killed, and the latest reports indicate that 9 soldiers have embraced martyrdom. So that indicates that our armed forces are determined to go to any length, to protect our security and sovereignty. So that's the traditional security. Now coming to the non-traditional security, due to COVID, there was a lot of unemployment, and then we were facing, thanks to indirect taxation, because of the inability to widen the tax net, the concentration and the rate of indirect taxation increases, which increases inflation, which makes cost of production more expensive. So that makes it very difficult for our producers to produce things at a competitive rate for international exports. So that is very important for us, and I am sure our finance team negotiated that factor. Also the fact that Pakistan is one of the main victims of the climate change. So I think how we negotiate with the world financial institution must consider not just our needs, but the international financial institutions' own obligation towards ensuring that the commitments that they expect from the developing countries is a reflection of their challenges. including climate change. The floods that came last year flooded almost 10% of Pakistan's area. So these things must be considered, and I think a very important factor, not just looking at the economic aspect, but the political aspect is critical. Two things. Number one, we need political stability. We cannot allow any party, the nation and the state should not allow any party to disrupt or disturb the political situation, because that not only makes governance difficult, that also discourages the foreign investment and support, and makes international financial institutions also worried about the ability of the state and the government to fulfill its commitment. But lastly, I think it is very important that before the elections, the nature of politics should change. The culture of politics should change. It should be, I think the party should compete not just in terms of leg pulling, but also blaming each other, but in reality they should focus on governance, competing in terms of governance. Which party has delivered more and better in terms of relief despite the floods, despite inflation, despite COVID challenges, and also in terms of the floods that came last year, and we are also undergoing the monsoon right now. So I hope everything is stays safe, but its effects and how to provide relief to the suffering people must be a governance approach and a priority of different political parties. If a party is expecting votes from Sindh, what have they done to alleviate the problems faced by those who suffered out of the floods? Similarly in KPK. So I think there should be a healthy competition between political parties in terms of who have delivered the most under the worst circumstances.
Absolutely, and we'll be taking a look at this in depth later on as well, because this is important and it of course affects the economic situation of the country as well. We'll take a short break here and we'll continue the discussion. Welcome back to the debate. We're talking, of course, about the very important development for Pakistan, the approval by the Executive Board of the IMF for the standby arrangement. And this, of course, means that Pakistan will be getting $1.2 billion immediately. And, of course, this entire program of $3 billion spans over a period of 9 months, which is, of course, a big news for the country, and means, as the Prime Minister has also tweeted recently, that this means that the current position that Pakistan is in, especially in terms of facing its short to medium term challenges, is important and is now, of course, put in a positive direction, especially after this particular announcement. He has also lauded the efforts of the Finance Minister and has also thanked the MD IMF in this regard. Earlier, we also know that there were positive developments coming in the form of bilateral engagements from Saudi Arabia and the UAE, which have added to the foreign exchange reserves of the country, and the Finance Minister is hopeful that the numbers will be even better by the end of the week. We are, of course, discussing the various aspects of this development and the challenges that still remain, especially in the 9 months time period that Pakistan has been given, and what needs to be done given the fact that the country in the same time period would also be undergoing a change of government. We have with us Mr. Farrukh Pitafi, of course, a senior analyst. We have Syed Muhammad Ali, he's a security analyst, and Maha Rehman as our economist of the show today. Maha, I'll start with you again. When we were earlier discussing the different facets, we were talking about how, of course, this would then translate into the public eye and what it means in terms of the alleviation of poverty. And I want to understand also your input in terms of the concerns, or in some quarters, a criticism that has been raised regarding the arrangement with the IMF in terms of what it means for Pakistan, the kind of difficulties it raises, and how exactly Pakistan will be able to come out of that and come through. Of course, we understand that this is a breather space that was absolutely necessary, but is that something that is also something that is in response with the kind of criticism that is being raised? And especially when we take a look at issues such as inflation and policy rate, that of course remains, and add to the problems of the people, how will then they be taken into a positive light, and the people be told that in fact this is something that is bringing the country to progress?
Okay, and I think thanks for that question. So I think first of all, I'd say we all need to understand and be sure of the fact that going to IMF for this tranche, we really had no other option. So this was really our option at this point in time, given our twin deficits. And we will have to go back to IMF in addition to this standby arrangement for an extended finance facility, because our financing requirements for the next 3 years are $91 billion. And there is no way that with the kind of revenues that we raise, that we will be able to meet our financing requirements on our own. So this is not the last IMF program, and there really was no other option for the government at this point in time to not go to the IMF because default was staring us in the face. As far as the policy prescriptions for IMF are concerned, I think they are just there to help and enable the government to bring in fiscal discipline, to redirect our policies towards structural reforms, and to tackle the big elephants in the room that are bleeding our resources. So the criticism I feel is really misplaced because as far as if you look at this program's prescription and the prescription that has come in the past, that has only been to help Pakistan government make the right decisions. And I don't disagree with those policy prescriptions. I think that was the need of the time. We need to make our taxation progressive. We need to curtail the energy, we need to curtail the circular debt. We need to improve the business climate in the country. And talking about the impact on the common man, I think the foremost thing the government needs to do is to, and that was also earlier alluded to in this program, is to make the taxation progressive. Because right now we keep on adding taxes to the formal sector and we keep on adding taxes for the salaried class and we keep on adding increasing the taxes for people who are already registered in the tax net, and there is no taxes back into the tax net. We don't talk about the land tax. We don't talk about tax in the real estate. So those are the difficult decisions that we need to take. Yes, they will take a hit on the voting bank for whatever political party decides to take those decisions, but that is required to move the country forward. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we also need to, that has also been emphasized by IMF earlier in the year, is to increase the allotment and the money given out and the stipend given out through BISP. So BISP is one really good example of a program that has continued throughout governments. And I think there's only a need to make that stronger. BISP targets the low income class, but with rising inflation and the other difficult economic conditions in the country, they also take a hit on the lower middle income class. And that was a class that also really suffered during COVID. And they're not covered by the BISP stipend, and they will not go asking for loans, or they're not eligible to receive economic respite. So going forward as a government plans, we also need to plan for the lower middle income class and the middle income class who will be specially impacted by these measures. But the right thing to do before the government right now is...
Right. I'll come back to you for further discussion on that. If you want to complete your thought, you can.
To sum it, we just need completing the correcting the economic fundamentals going forward.
Right. We've also been joined by Mr. Abid Qayyum Saderi, who's the Executive Director, STPI. Thank you very much, Abid Sahab, for joining us today. Of course, a very big news for the country in terms of the IMF Executive Board approval, and this is something that we were hoping for, especially since we got the staff level agreement. First, your comments on this. Abid Sahab, can you hear me? Unfortunately, I don't think we've been joined by Mr. Abid. I will try and establish our contact once again. But Maha, continuing on what you were earlier saying as well, especially in terms of the kind of efforts that are needed, I then, of course, want to understand whether or not any of these challenges and measures that need to be taken in will at any point come in contradiction with what the IMF expects from the country.
we do have a tendency of going our own way, making our own decisions, and not paying the due regard to the IMF prescription. And that has only been to our own disadvantage. And that is exactly the reason why we were not able to complete the ninth review, the 10th review, and the tranche that was supposed to come in 9 months earlier had such a massive delay. So it is not in our interest to not be following the policy prescription, because they, as far as I understand and evaluate independently, they are only in the country's best interest. So going forward, I think we do need to tackle in addition to making the structural reforms that are necessary in the economy to increase exports, we also need to be listening into the IMF and seeing what is necessary to release each one of the three tranches. So the current standby arrangement that has been agreed upon ends in April, and each one of the tranches that is due, the first one will come to the current government. The second one is going to be due when we'll have the interim government in place, since the Prime Minister has announced elections on August 14th. And the third one is going to be due with the new government. So there's going to be one tranche that's going to be due in each government's tenure. And I think it's only in our best interest to be following the IMF's prescription to unlock this funding.
Right, absolutely. Farrukh, there's of course good news coming in previously as well in terms of the money that has come from friendly countries such as Saudi Arabia and UAE, as you were mentioning earlier as well. But I want to understand, while of course we're very grateful to the support that has been extended from Saudi Arabia, UAE and China previously as well, I also want to understand whether or not this is something that will be the focus, especially in these 9 months, in terms of increase in bilateral engagements and the kind of inflow that we would like into the country, and how will then that also move ahead in line with the kind of external debt that Pakistan still has.
Right. Sana, these monies that have arrived in Pakistan essentially have arrived here to shore up our forex reserves, and that is the sole purpose, right? They have to be returned eventually whenever we are asked to return it. But regardless of that, of course, first of all, we had to stabilize the economy. And I keep on saying that when you talk about the, various dynamics of our economy, the capacity of our economy, everybody who kept on saying that Pakistan can default, and remember there are those pundits who kept on saying that, oh, the country is going to default, it is going to default. Then when the government kept on saying that we are not going to default, they changed the tune and they started saying we should actually default because that is a strategy. And now the same people are once again saying, why the hell are you celebrating? It is only loan that is coming from IMF, right? But the problem is at this moment that you have to realize, one, you have to stabilize the economy. So that is being stabilized as we speak. Then the next thing is to get as much investment as possible, as much economic growth as can be going. And remember that even our service sector, our manufacturing, our agriculture, they all are very huge planks. And that means that this country cannot essentially default. The only problem was our external payment crisis that is now going to abate. With that, in coming days, we are going to attract, if we can create these opportunities that are needed. Remember, many important places that we might actually think as deadwood. For example, SOEs, there are many which might be considered that way. They will be, very useful for investors from abroad. For example, what do we do with our airports, right? Why is it that the government of Pakistan is running the airports? If a private company from abroad or from within the country actually starts taking that burden off the government's shoulders, it is going to create a lot of solutions for the country. You want to me to conclude, right?
Yes, we're going to be moving on to Abhisab as well, but you can conclude first.
Yeah, I very quickly wanted to say that look at the achievements of this government. First, FATF, right? The country was in throes of that, and we could not extract the country out of it. But finally, this government managed to do that as well with the help, once again, of the army. And regarding these shocks or these bolts from the blue, Sana, one big problem with our taxation system is the presence of courts and their intervention at the wrong moment, at wrong time, right? For example, government actually came up with this idea of one-time super tax for very rich, and that was 10%. And Supreme Court intervened and cut it down to 4%. because we had to take care of monies that were needed, we ended up levying more, indirect taxes.
Right.
So inflation and Supreme Court of Pakistani courts, their responsibility is there also to ensure that they don't actually cut down and frustrate government's efforts to stabilize the economy.
Absolutely. Let me also once again welcome in the show Abid Qayyum Sidari, Executive Director, STPI. Abid Sahab, can you hear me?
Ji, I can hear you.
Right. Abid Sahab, of course, there is a very important and major development for the country in terms of the IMF Executive Board agreement. First, your take on this particular development, and then we'll move forward.
I think finally the wait is over, and the last hurdle in securing this standby arrangement that is completed with the approval of IMF Executive Board. And we have already seen that the news of this arrangement that not only brought optimism in Pakistani markets, but also the friends of Pakistan. And yesterday, the deposits from Saudi Arabia, and today the deposits from UAE in State Bank. This is a good domain. Same is the Fitch's improvement of rating of domestic currency. So one hopes that from now onwards, this inflow of dollar that would continue, the rupee versus dollar, it would remain range bound and stable. It will not be that volatile. But the key is to implement all the commitments that Pakistan has made to secure this standby arrangement. And of course, the caretaker government and then the next elected government, all three of them, they have to own and fulfill these commitments. And of course, the next elected government then have to work on the new arrangements and the framework for next extended fund facility program, which is a must for Pakistan's economic stability. So this is a bridge financing, and then we will have to go for another 3 to 4 years of extended fund facility program. And only then Pakistan can claim to be economically sustainable country. Otherwise, this debt unsustainability would keep on haunting us.
Right, and Abid Sahab, the positive developments that you were earlier mentioning, I want to understand how sustainable they will be in terms of the future, such as, of course, the value of the rupee, as you were mentioning, and exactly what factors will they be dependent on given this particular 9-month period?
The value of rupee depends on demand and supply, so it's purely market driven. But of course, as long as Pakistan remains on track with IMF, the dollar inflow would continue, and that would keep the value of rupee stable. So the sort of volatility that we have been witnessing during last few months, 10, 15 rupees jump overnight on both sides, at least that sort of trend would end. Similarly, the holding of dollar by investors, that should stop now, because when they would know that there is an inflow of dollar, they would also start selling their dollars in the same panic in which they were buying it. And the remittances which were coming through informal means in hundi and hawala, one is very optimistic that if the difference between open market and interbank rate will not be too wide, then Pakistan would start receiving those remittances through banking channel, formal banking channel again. So all these are good developments, and certainly they will have positive impact on domestic currency.
Right. Dr. Saab, and Sana, with your permission, let me ask a question as well.
Right.
Dr. Saab, before you joined us, we were discussing the climate change emergency that we have been responding to for the last 1.5 years. And the question was when the caretaker government is going to be there, and there is an SBA. There's little that any government can do regarding those matters. Do you think that after this SBA being signed, those commitments that were made at Geneva will also start trickling in, and then the present government, the next government, and next to next government, all three can also take care of the climate change issue as well?
Certainly, Pitafi sir, because the Geneva pledges, if you look at the composition of that $10 billion, almost $8.5 billion that is committed by World Bank, by ADB, and by Islamic Development Bank. And all three, they had linked their release of their funds with the IMF program. So the mere fact that Pakistan is under IMF umbrella and the certificate of Pakistan being under fiscal discipline, that would help the flow of these funds from multilateral. Although it is the project funding, it's project financing, it's not a budgetary support. So Pakistan needs to prepare this doable, tangible projects. Those may be funded by these multilateral organizations. And again, it may take time, but I think it's a good beginning. And very soon you will see that some of those pledges, they would start getting materialized. Just to give a comparison, till today, out of those $10 billion, only $300 million could be utilized and could be materialized. The rest of the amount, it was linked to Pakistan being under IMF program, and now one hopes that things they would start moving.
Right, and Abhisab, there's of course also the emphasis on bringing in more investment in the country, and we kept discussing exactly how Pakistan will be moving forward to this, and I want to understand whether there is going to be a strategic plan in place. I understand that the body, the SIFC, is there and has been created for this particular purpose, but what do you think should be the plan of action, especially in terms of the kind of pitch that Pakistan will be giving in to investors, particularly now after this approval, that will attract more investment, and that also more importantly in productive sectors that was being mentioned in the discussion earlier.
Especially including food production.
Yeah. You see, Pakistan was hit by three sort of deficits: fiscal deficit, current account or dollar deficit, and trust deficit. So obviously our friends, the investors, even Pakistani investors, all of them, they were affected by polity inconsistency and by lack of continuity in policy. They were also affected by political instability, and they were affected by bureaucratic hurdles and procedural roadblocks. So if one looks at some of the MOUs which were signed by the dignitaries that visited Pakistan, from Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia to Mahathir Mohamad back in 2018, 2019, at that time, I think MOUs worth $250 billion were signed between Pakistan and the friendly countries, but none of those MOUs could got materialized, and the reason is all the factors that I mentioned. Now with this Investment Facilitation Council, if a guarantee can be provided and assurance can be provided of policy continuity and policy consistency, irrespective of any political change in the country, I think that is what is required to bridge the trust deficit between Pakistan and the rest of the world. And I hope that this assurance would be there. And the mere fact that during last 2 days we have already received these pledges, the deposits from Saudi Arabia and from UAE, that is, I think, a very positive omen, and that shows that this process has already started working. Last week, there was this Land Information Management System, LIN Center of Excellence, and again, Saudi Arabia, it provided $500 million for it. Then the government's plan of green growth and this investment in agriculture. So all these things, I would say that due to better coordination, synchronization of policies, and of course, the assurance that all stakeholders are on board to provide policy consistency, I think they would facilitate the inflow of investment in Pakistan.
Thank you very much, Abid Salari Saab, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. Maha, anything that you'd like to add before we conclude?
I just wanted to, so on the last point that was being made, in addition to in order to attract more investment. In addition to bridging the trust deficit, I think we also need to improve the ease of doing business in the country, make the taxation processes similar, make the process of remitting money easier, make the process of registering a business here easier. If we make it easy for somebody to start a business here, to open a subsidiary here, in addition to bridging the trust deficit, we will be attracting more investment and more funding, and we will only build on the optimism that SBA and the money from UAE and Saudi Arabia has brought in.
Right, absolutely. Thank you very much, Maha, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. Farrukh, anything you'd like to say in the end?
Just hopeful right now because I've been, an emblem of lack of hope whenever I talk about these things. I think right now I see a lot of hope, and let us stick to the fundamentals and the instructions that keep on coming from financial or economic pundits. I think that this country is meant for greatness, and thanks to a Prime Minister, Army Chief, all the people who have actually contributed to today's win, we can go a long mile with all this. Let us hope in coming days we see that kind of accomplishment.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Farrukh, and of course, thank you to all of our guests who had joined us and was part of the discussion. This is a very big news for the country, and it's a good start for us to move ahead in the right direction. And of course, we're confident in the team that has brought us this far, and so will take us in the right direction in the future as well. So congratulations once again to all of our viewers, and with hope of more good news coming, it's our way. We're hopeful, of course, of a better tomorrow. That's all that we have from the debate at the moment. We'll see you tomorrow.